mindfulness meditation with Paula in August. We're going to do a little bit of art and daily journaling. I'm going to be doing that with April and September. And then following up in October, we're going to do a little bit of just sort of rounding everything off and talking about how important it is to just take time for yourself. So I look forward to, having that. And now I'm going to turn this over to Susan. She's going to give her presentation. And then at the very end, if you have any questions, either hold it to the end or put it in the chat and I'll read it when she's done. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. It's great to see everybody here this afternoon. If you don't know me, I'm Susan Cohn. I'm the clinical social worker here at RSS. I provide individual counseling to members, and I also lead two groups, a bereavement group for people who've recently lost their spouse, and a women's group called Life Transitions. When I'm not here at RSS, I have a private psychotherapy practice in Westchester. So Barbara explained the reasoning behind our series. May is Mental Health Month, and certainly we noticed that people have been going through tons of stress over the past few years, so we figured that this workshop series would be really, really timely. So I'm going to speak today about the mind-body connection in stress and anxiety. And I chose this topic because so often I hear people say that they're reluctant to address mental health issues because, after all, it's just in my head. And after today, I hope you realize that nothing is just in your head, that everything you think or feel originates in your brain, and it's influenced by hormones, chemicals, and neurological signals that impact your body in all kinds of ways. Your moods impact your health, but your health also impacts your mood. As Bernie Siegel, the author of Love, Medicine, and Miracles, has said, the mind and body aren't separate units, but one integrated system. How we act, what we think, and eat are all related to our health. This is such an important idea. It's the reason that it's imperative that we really do take care of our stress, anxiety, our grief, or our depression, because if we don't, left untreated, these emotions can have a really negative impact on our physical health, our immune system, our ability to manage chronic conditions, to avoid them, and on our overall health and wellness. For a really long time, and still somewhat today, mental health was like the ugly stepsister of physical health, the one nobody really wanted to talk about or be around. The stigma and shame and discomfort really prevented a lot of people from getting help that really they would have benefited from. Today, the stigma is lessening, though it's far from gone, and that's a wonderful thing. We would never tell somebody, oh, don't bother with that broken leg, or don't treat your infected throat. So why would we tell them they should just get over crippling anxiety or overwhelming stress? So point I'm trying to make really is that because the mind and body are so linked, it's really, really important that we do address our mental health concerns. So what I'm going to do for the rest of our time together is I'm going to go through the mind-body connection in a little more detail, and then I'm going to discuss how different strategies for managing stress and anxiety have developed because of our greater understanding of the interconnectedness of our emotions and our physical self. I also just want to make a point. I think that anxiety and stress are here to stay. They're not going away. We live in a very anxious and stressful world. So what's imperative is that we really learn strategies and techniques to live with stress and anxiety in a way that is less uncomfortable and creates less unease. So some things to think about when we talk about mind-body. Scientists now are talking about the brain as the hardware that allows us to experience the thoughts, beliefs, and emotions that we call the mind. Scientists have studied which part of the brain. We have Maritza cooling me off, everybody. Let's thank her. Thank you so much. I'm like melting in here. Of course, I'm a little distracted now. You'll have to give me a second. You are the best. Thank you so much. Oh, that is so good. Okay, so there's all kinds of communication that takes place between the brain and our neurological, endocrine, and immune systems. And in fact, we've recently learned a lot more too about the relationship between our brain in our head and the brain in our gut, which sometimes is called the little brain or the belly brain, but the more scientific name for it is the enteric nervous system. Now, we all know intuitively that there's a link between emotion and our bellies, because how do we describe certain experiences? We'll say, oh, it was gut-wrenching, or I had butterflies in my stomach. So we are aware already of the relationship between the things that we're thinking and how it feels in our body. But what we really didn't know before and have a better understanding now is that it's actually a two-way street. So our mood will impact our gut, but our gut can also impact our mood. And that's somewhat new information. So for people who suffer with gastrointestinal issues, it could be that those issues are actually creating mood changes. And it also is really important for us to think about what we are eating in order to really create the best bacterial, to get your microbes where they ought to be. So we'll talk a little bit about eating later. It also really helps us to understand why, when we talk about treatment for anxiety and stress, that the combination of a talk therapy like cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a mind-body kind of approach, and some kind of antidepressant or anti-anxiety, which calms the nervous system, why that is going to work so well. Just a word about CBT, if you're not familiar with it. It is a psychological intervention that's been shown to strengthen self-function and help the body better fight disease. CBT is an evidence-based approach. That means it's been tested scientifically to show that it does make a difference. That helps people become more aware of and identify negative and habitual thought patterns and replace those with more positive and functional responses. So many of us who practice yoga or who meditate know that when we finish our practice, we always feel better. But we didn't really know, or at least I didn't, that these practices actually change our biology, that they affect us at the cellular level in positive and wellness-enhancing ways. So we're going to get back to some of this a little bit later on. So whenever we talk about stress and anxiety, we almost always talk about fight or flight mechanism. And that's because fight or flight is how our body registers acute stress and anxiety. So if you've ever been walking down the street in your own thoughts and all of a sudden you step off the curb and then suddenly realize that coming at you is one of those bike messengers or a car and you jump back, that's a very dramatic example, because what will be happening to you when you realize that car is coming at you? Anybody? What might you feel? Anyone want to answer? I can't see you all, so you have to unmute yourself and then tell me.
You feel terror because somebody's going to kill you.
Thank you, Nevis. How is that terror manifested? What might you feel?
I guess, would it be in some people to freeze, and some people to run, and some people to just, feel horrible fear and anxiety, and maybe their stomach would turn, or who knows, so many things.
Exactly. Thank you. So you're either going to fight, flight, or you may freeze. And what happens is your heart may be pounding, you may sweat, your breathing gets very rapid and very shallow. You're probably not taking really deep breaths. Your blood pressure and heart rate are going to go up because your body is preparing to fight that threat. And also at that time, your brain, the part of your brain that gets activated is the amygdala, which is the most primitive part of the brain, responsible really for just keeping us alive. So when we're in acute anxiety like that, we don't have the ability to call upon our highest levels of cognition. And that's something to think about if we're chronically anxious, and we may talk about feeling foggy or not really being able to concentrate. So this fight or flight mechanism was developed by our ancestors thousands and thousands of years ago to help them survive physical threats and danger from wild animals or fires. Very, very different from the kinds of stresses that we have today. In modern life, we don't usually have wild beasts coming at us, but our bodies respond as if we do. So if we stay in a state of high anxiety or we're chronically stressed, that means that our bodies are in that activated state. Our blood pressure is going to stay high, our heart rate's going to stay high. And so you can imagine that over long term, it's not great for our bodies. So we can experience stress in a lot of different places in our bodies. Anyone want to share where they feel stress? Anybody? It's hard. I know it's hard to participate when we're not really seeing each other all, but so I'll say that for a lot of people, they may feel palpitations, stomach upset, headaches, dizziness, skin can break out, hair loss, and probably really common, people have tension in their jaw, in their face, their neck, shoulders, back, lot of physical manifestations. And stress can also affect our sleep, our eating habits. We may feel very listless and not have any energy or initiative, have trouble making decisions, concentrating. We may be irritable and cranky, and we may feel fearful. So that's a whole constellation. It's a lot of things that stress and anxiety can do. And taken as a whole, pretty awful to be feeling like that. So now let's talk about some of the things that we can do to manage our stress and anxiety. And the first,
I'm sorry, Madeline, did you have your hand up or no?
I did have it up because what's stressing me right now, and that's why I'm laying down, is I went to one appointment like 3 blocks from my house. Now I'm going to another appointment 3 blocks in the other direction. I was telling this lady Barbara how I'm going to be getting off the class and I didn't want to look rude or think that I wasn't enjoying it. I have to, go, not now, but like at about 10 to 2. So I got plenty of time, but that's what's stressing me out. A new eye doctor and having to go to 2 appointments in one day, that stresses me out. I can't handle it. 1 I can handle, fine, but 2, forget it. That gets me like over the moon. Like I'm just like in orbit, like I'm like this,
Thank you, Madeline, for sharing that. And I think that we can have overload if things get scheduled, too many things in one day. So I'm sorry that you have so much stuff to do, and hopefully you'll get it all done. So one of the things that we want to look at is identifying the source of stress and what it is that's stressing us out, whether it's having too many appointments or other reasons. But for a lot of us, just living these days is stressful. There's just so much going on in the world. We're still in the middle of a pandemic that doesn't seem to want to end. We have a horrific war going on in Ukraine. Our country feels like it's in crisis. We just had a broiling hot weekend, so we're worried about climate change and global warming. So these are really big issues over which we have almost no control. I mean, I think we can, as far as COVID, we can assess our own personal risk, and we can, wear our masks and social distance, make our own decisions, but we don't have any control over vaccines or variants or what other people are doing. So when we're stressed and we're worried about the things that we have little control over, we can continue on that hamster wheel of just ruminating and thinking over and over again. So when it's something big that we can't change, we need to figure out a way that we can let it go. On a more specific and personal level, older age can be very stressful. We're all managing a whole lot. Many of us have lost our partners, or they're in ill health. We may not be in the best of health. Our friends have died, some, or they've moved away. We may worry about our children, our grandchildren, our future, our finances. And some of us are dealing with practical things that we never had to deal with before, that now that we're left alone, and it's kind of a whole new world. So some of us are also feeling very lonely and very isolated. So the first step here is to look at these sources of anxiety and see what's in my power to change. What can I change? Maybe the next time I'll see if I can avoid scheduling too many things in one day. Maybe if it upsets me to see a certain friend, I won't see her anymore. There are things that we can do, from little tiny things to bigger things, that we can change our situation. However, there are some things that we really can't change no matter what. And then we have to work to accept it. So acceptance to me is one of those cornerstones to mental health. It's such an important concept. And accepting something doesn't mean that we just say, all right, whatever happens, happens. It means that when we acknowledge that I've done everything I can do, I can't do anything about this, I'm going to accept the situation the way it is and stop resisting it. And that creates a lot less suffering. So for example, today, let's say I woke up with a really bad headache. I would probably be freaking out. Like today of all days, do I have to have a headache? I have to present today. I want to be at my best. How can I be at my best with a headache? Can't believe this is happening today, and blah, blah, blah. So do you think this is going to help the headache? Probably not, no. If, on the other hand, I said, okay, I woke up today, I have a headache, I'm going to try the usual things, I'll drink some water, I'll take some medicine, and hopefully I'm going to feel better. But this is what it is right now. So I might still have the headache, but what I wouldn't have is anxiety and stress about having the headache. So there are things that we can't change. We're still going to deal with them. But if we can lessen that anxiety about the things we can't change, we do improve our situation. So this idea about acceptance comes from mindfulness. And if you've come to things before at RSS, you know that we talk about mindfulness a lot. And the reason we do is because it's so helpful in improving quality of life. The main idea of mindfulness is that we accept whatever's happening right now without judgment or trying to make it different. We understand that whatever we feel right now is likely to change and to move, because that's what life is all about, change and impermanence. We understand that life has good moments and not so good moments, and we have to accept both the good and the not so good as they come. When I work with people who are chronically anxious, I remind them that anxiety is an emotion. It comes from our head or maybe from our gut. But in either case, anxiety in and of itself is not dangerous. It can feel really bad, but it isn't life-threatening. Rather than fight anxiety, to resist it, if we can sit with it, reminding ourselves that this familiar, awful feeling it's just anxiety. I know this. I've had this before. Trying to breathe through it or move through it, often it will dissipate. When we panic about being anxious, the way I did with the headache, the anxiety will dig in even deeper. And it's really paradoxical, but so true. The more anxious we are about anxiety, the more anxious we're going to get. And anxiety is like Pandora's box. If you become anxious about one thing and your anxiety gets triggered, all of a sudden you're anxious about everything. So another phrase, okay. So the thing that I will say to people is, if your anxiety starts bubbling up, is anything bad happening right now? And usually, if you think about it, it isn't. There really isn't anything bad happening that minute. So that can be helpful. And another phrase that also can be helpful is, this is how it is right now. So you know those days where you're in a rush, you have an appointment, and you go to get washed up and you have no hot water. And so it's really hard to get ready to go. And then you run to catch the elevator and the elevator's broken. So you have to walk down all the stairs, and then you run to get a cab. Forget it, there's not a cab in sight. And by that time, you're pretty convinced that the universe hates you and that your whole day is totally ruined. So those days, it can be helpful to say, this is what's happening right now, but it won't always happen like this. And in an hour or two, things might be really different. So a final principle that we'll talk about with mindfulness is to stay in the present moment. Because so often our stress and anxiety comes from imagining what might happen, what could happen in the future. We're really not great fortune tellers, and we really can't predict the future, even though we think we can. And so often what actually happens is not what we thought, but something completely different. So much suffering could be avoided if we could really live one day at a time. So far, just to summarize, we've looked at the source of our anxiety and stress. We've identified those areas that we can change, and we're moving and working on those that we can't. We're trying to breathe through our stress and anxiety and not resist it, and stay in the present moment without looking back in regret or looking ahead with dread. What else can we do? Well, we've talked about the fact that stress and anxiety are inextricably linked to our body. So we probably need to look at our health habits and our routines to see what we can do to enhance overall wellness. A healthy lifestyle is really critical to maintaining not only physical health, but mental health as well. And when people come to me for counseling, I really try to look at their lifestyle and the kinds of how they're taking care of themselves and whether they're practicing good self-care. So the first thing to look at in terms of lifestyle is exercise. Not a surprise, I'm sure you've heard it many, many times before. But study after study after study has shown that movement from the smallest change, even sometimes just changing your position in your seat, or walking miles and miles, and every little increment in between has very positive effect on our mental health. Sometimes literally just standing up and pacing in front of your couch can change your energy. Nothing really is better for you than movement, whether it's walking, stretching, yoga, dancing, swimming, whatever it is that you enjoy and that you'll actually do. One of the difficulties is that when we feel stressed and anxious, a lot of times we don't feel like doing anything. We don't feel like going for that walk, even if we know that we'll probably feel better. So I would say, try to do something, even if it's a baby step. So many times I get home from work and I know I should go out. I don't really want to. I'm tired. And I literally sometimes feel like I'm pushing myself out the door. And when I say to myself, okay, 5 minutes, you'll walk 5 minutes. And when 5 minutes is up, usually I'm like, okay, another 5. And then once you get into it, usually, at least for me, then I'm okay. And whenever I come back, I've never come back from a walk and said, boy, that was a bad idea. So getting out there in whatever way you're able to, even sometimes just opening your window and staring outside, whatever it is, just change the situation and move your body a little bit. And RSS, if you're not familiar with us, we have a million wonderful exercise programs, and they're really tailored to everybody's ability and everybody's level. Next, I want to talk about sleep. So when we're anxious and stressed, what happens to our sleep? Usually we have trouble falling asleep, we may have trouble staying asleep, and we may be waking up at ungodly hours that we never saw before in our lives. There are a lot of tips for sleep. It's called sleep hygiene, creating good sleep hygiene. That could be a whole other workshop. But in terms of if anxiety is keeping you from sleeping, one thing to do that can be really helpful is about an hour before you go to sleep, not right before, get a piece of paper and write down all the things that are worrying you. Everything you can think of, put it on a piece of paper. That way, when you finally put your head on the pillow, you don't have to worry anymore. You don't have to go on that hamster wheel because it's all written down on the paper. It's there. You can look at it tomorrow morning. A similar technique is called worry once, worry well. And again, at some point during the day, set aside 15 minutes, time yourself, and go to town. Worry about everything. Allow yourself full reign to worry about whatever comes to mind. And then when that timer rings, you're done. So during the day, if you start to worry, I have my worry session coming up, and afterwards, already worried about that. Don't need to think about that anymore. Now, obviously, that's going to take some practice, but it can really be very, very helpful. We also want to think about, what are we doing before bed? Are we watching the news? If you have a 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock news habit, please don't. Watching the news at 9 o'clock in the morning can stress you out all day. But certainly late in the day, right before you go to bed, not a good idea. Probably limiting our ingestion of news is also a good idea. So think about what you're doing before you go to sleep. Don't watch a scary movie, something light. Reading is really good, listening to a meditation, and try to get into a bedtime routine, going to bed at the same time and waking up at the same time every day. Because then your body gets into a rhythm, your circadian rhythms really get established. I actually have something on my phone at 10 o'clock every night. I get a little message. It says, "Wind down now for bed." And I always think, oh, that's so nice. My phone is taking care of me. And it reminds me that I need a good hour, hour and a half at the end of the day to really calm down. And so it's a reminder to put things away, get done, go upstairs, and start that whole bedtime ritual. I also want to say a word about sleep medications. Nothing is worse than insomnia. It's really, really a very difficult thing to be tossing and turning at night. But sleep medication should really be used sparingly, infrequently, and under the supervision of a doctor, because they really can be contraindicated for older people. And I would say that too about supplements or herbs. If something is powerful enough to help you fall asleep, then it's powerful enough to maybe interact with other medications you're taking. And so you should let your healthcare provider know that you're doing that. Okay. So nutrition, we talked earlier about the gut brain and the head brain and how they interact. So clearly what we eat is very, very important in maintaining a healthy bacterial environment in our bellies and in feeling good. And what happens when we feel stressed and anxious? A lot of times we really don't want to bother eating. We may overeat out of stress. We may stop eating. We may pick. We might be eating junk. So all those things are very common and very understandable, but they're not really the best thing for us. If we can try to eat really simple, it doesn't have to be elaborate, but just choose things that are a little more nutritious. And again, RSS has a lot of really good nutrition programs going on right now. We're doing a lot about plant-based eating. And it can be that you're just having little snacks all day. If that feels better for you, it's not fussing, not cleanup, but just that you're putting something healthy into your body. So as I said before, when we make any kind of change in our lifestyle, we should really start very, very small. Break everything down into little tiny, tiny baby steps. And then one thing at a time. Because if we try to change everything, what happens? We just get overwhelmed. It seems like too much. Lose our motivation, and we feel bad about ourselves. So we don't want to go that route. Not a good route. I want to say a word or two about medication. When we're stressed or we're having really intense anxiety, it really feels awful. And we do want to find a way to make it stop, like now. So sometimes we may think, I'll have a glass of wine or a cocktail, and it could make us feel better in the moment, but it's not really a good long-term plan. Alcohol can make us, actually it's a depressant, it can make us feel worse in the end, it can interfere with our sleep, and as we get older, we metabolize alcohol less well. As far as prescription medications go, in my opinion, medication, when you need it, is really, really helpful, and it can make a tremendous difference. With older adults, it's important that your prescriber starts low dose, and goes slow to make sure that your body can tolerate it. Medication for anxiety is really two types. The first is for chronic anxiety, when you feel anxious all the time, and that would be a medicine you would take every day. Probably an SSRI, the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. And what that means is these are the medications that allow our brain to make more serotonin, the happy hormone. And examples of that are medications you've probably heard of, like Celexa, Lexapro, Zoloft. Those are some common SSRIs. And what they do is they will work to kind of quiet some of that internal chatter that we've been talking about, so that your thoughts become more clear. And once your thoughts are clear, you're not experiencing that intense anxiety that's so disabling, you can start to look at things and make changes that we've talked about, and adjust your lifestyle as well. The other kind of medication addresses acute anxiety. So if you're having a panic attack, for example, Xanax, Ativan, and in the past, Valium, not prescribed as much, would be prescribed, and they will stop a panic attack in its track. However, they also should not be used regularly, because they're very powerful medications. And what happens is, because they work so well, sometimes if we feel like we're getting anxious, we may want to take a medicine like that. And each time we use it, our body's going to adjust. And over time, we're going to keep needing more and more and more. And medication really is something that should be adjunctive. In other words, it's a step, but it's not the only step. Medication shouldn't be used alone. In my opinion, it should always be in concert with talk therapy. So the next thing we're going to talk about is counseling to manage stress and anxiety. And I can't overemphasize how helpful I think counseling is. Now, of course, that's how I make my living. So maybe I'm not that unbiased. But however, because that is how I make my living, I've had decades of observing how beneficial it is when people are able to talk to someone they trust, someone objective who can listen without judgment, with empathy, and help them to look at patterns, to look at things that they characteristically do, and help them to learn maybe some different ways of responding or doing things. When we hold our stress inside, as we've been talking about for this hour, it creates issues both in our body and also in our mood and our outlook. Again, I'm like a commercial for RSS, but RSS does offer counseling opportunities here. I provide individual counseling, and we run a whole bunch of support groups for grief, for caregivers, for people aging alone. We have a women's support group. We have a pet therapy group. There are always new groups forming. Selena Ng, Audrey Swanson, and I are the social work team, And along with Petronella, our nurse, we can help you access hotlines, support groups, individual counseling, really whatever you are looking for. Again, I want to talk about cognitive behavioral therapy because it is really a mind-body approach that's very, that can be really helpful. And CBT is an evidence-based approach, and it really takes that form. So we look at our habitual thoughts, and we learn that thoughts come from our brain. We tend to think that everything we think is true, but it isn't. A lot of our thoughts really don't make sense. And we look at the evidence to support, does that actually make sense or does it really make sense? And so we learn to change those thoughts. And when we change our thoughts, we change our behavior. So that's kind of how it works. But if you are with a therapist who uses a different approach, it really doesn't matter. What really matters is that you feel safe, that you feel comfortable, and that you are feeling better. That's really what the goal would be. So we're getting towards the end here, and I want to talk about spirit. So we've talked about mind and we've talked about body, but I think there's another component, whether you call it soul or spirit or spirituality, that also is important in our mental health. It's different from religion, although they intersect. But spirituality is about finding meaning in life. When we're anxious and stressed, our spirit is also negatively impacted. And that in turn is going to impact the physical self. So nurturing our spirit, for each of us, it may mean a lot of different things, but some things that we can try are practicing yoga, meditating, praying, using mantras or affirmations, doing artwork, painting, drawing. Clay is great because it's tactile. Going for a walk, and in this neighborhood, we have so many beautiful places. We have Wave Hill and Van Cortlandt Park and the Botanical Gardens. Keeping a gratitude journal where we write down something every day that we're thankful for, or sometimes I ask people to keep positive things notebooks to write down something good that happens every day, because we tend to focus on the negative a lot stronger than we focus on positive. Journaling in general can be helpful, writing poetry, being with family members, as long as that's not too much of a source of stress, taking care of our pets, knitting, sewing, crafting, making music, listening to music, volunteering to help others. So volunteering, when we give of ourselves to others, it really takes us out of ourselves. It can shift our perspective and generally is very healing. So I just thought that before we take questions, maybe we would also do some grounding exercises. And one of the ones that I like are called cleansing breaths, and you may be familiar with them. But what I'd like everyone to do is just kind of sit up straight and get comfortable in your chair. And then we're all going to take a deep breath in through our nose. We're going to hold it for a second or two, and then we're going to let it out through our mouth with a big ha. And you can be as loud as you want. So let's do that 3 times. We're going to go in, ha, and again, ha. And one more time, ha. How do you feel? Good? Okay. Great, great. So cleansing breaths are always available to us. And a lot of times we forget that we're really not breathing. Like sometimes I can be driving here and I'm really focused and somebody cuts me off and I get really upset and I realize I'm not breathing. And then I have to stop and do some cleansing breaths. And it really does help almost immediately. 5 cleansing breaths, and I pretty much guarantee you will feel better. Another tip that I've seen people use, it's called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And so you can adapt this however it works for you. But essentially, when you start to feel yourself getting very anxious, to ground yourself, you use your senses. So you look for 5 things that you can see, 5 things in the room. So right now, I might see my phone and my tea and my chair. You get the idea. 4 things around you that you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and then the last one is 1 thing you can taste, but you may not really be able to taste anything. So instead, I suggest you think about 1 positive thing about yourself and then end it with a deep breath. So you're going to see in the literature, sometimes people do different variations of that, but that's essentially the idea. So I'm going to stop talking